This is Jen Kelly with the Louisiana Hospitality Foundation, and you're listening to Fleurs Truly.
Good evening, beautiful people, and happy Tuesday. This is Tina and Jeff with this week's episode of Fleurs Truly. Hey, Jeff, how are you this week?
Oh, I am fantastic. You know, I'm excited today.
Yes, it's a very exciting week here on Fleurs Truly.
It is. I've been thinking about it. You know, I've been going. I got so many questions, and of course, could we ask for a better guest today?
No, we cannot. We cannot at all. I'm really excited. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and let you introduce him.
All right. So this is a man who needs very little introduction. He is the lead singer, the everything behind Cowboy Mouth, Fred LeBlanc, New Orleans, one of our favorite sons in this town. Fred, welcome on to the show. It is so nice to have you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Tina. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna dive right in. First of all,
please.
We are in very weird times, of course, right now. But how are you? Like, what's going on with you right now? What are you doing?
Well, I'm doing all right. Like I told you guys, I'm in North Mississippi. My kids live up here, so I come up here half of the time during the summer and every other week when they're in school. So I'm just spending time with them. They live in Northeast Mississippi. I have a house up here. And so I just kind of play rock and roll dad up here. You know, it is strange times, and I find a lot of comfort in doing normal stuff, you know, especially since we can't really play any shows right now. But, you know, that's kind of where my focus is. My little girl had a bit of she had an accident a while back on a bouncy. And she's just been recovering. She'll be fine. Ultimately she'll be fine. But it was a rough accident. So, but wow. she's a brave. She's a tough little angel. And her older brother, he's 8 and she is 6, and he's been taking really great care of her. So, you know, we're very fortunate. You know, but just been kind of spending as much time with them as I possibly can, and things are good.
Yeah, you got to. They grow up so fast.
They grow up fast, you know. I mean, even the little times of just kind of just sitting there, just, you know, even doing things like playing a card game or watching a TV show or just playing in the backyard, scraping the dirt off their shoes or something like that. These are the little moments that you just want to grab a hold of and swallow whole so you remember them, and as best you can, you know, 20 years down the road. So
yeah, because y'all have been nonstop.
Yeah, pretty much. We've been. This is the longest break of time I've had from the road in 30 years.
What was your last show?
Our last show was we did a 3-day run, a short 3-day run. We did Kansas City at a place called Knuckleheads, and we did great there. And we did 2 nights in St. Louis, and all the shows went really well. I mean, the band was really firing on all cylinders like the past year and a half, and it's just gone really, really, really well. And it was you know, it was kind of a well-oiled machine, and you know, everything just kind of was going full tilt. And then I got married on March 7th, and then 3 days later, everything everything went to hell.
Well, wait a second. You're not saying those two things go together, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
No,
I mean, you know, we've had a couple of jokes about it, just like, okay, ever since we got married, let's see, there was a pandemic, there was a whatever else is going on, and you know, it's been kind of nutty.
You got the whole list, that's for sure. I mean, at one point,
the whole list.
At one point, you guys have been one of the hardest working bands in rock music for
thank you.
For years. I mean,
I'll take that as a compliment.
Let me tell you, I have, in full disclosure, I have certainly seen my fair share, but yet not close to enough Cowboy Mouth shows. I've been to.
You got a number?
I can tell you it's no fewer than 40, but probably in that 40 to 60 range. I've been to a lot of shows. My first show was December 23rd, 1995. It was the night I was saved. So I remember it very well at the House of Blues. Awesome. You jumping off the upper level there onto the crowd.
Yeah. And was that the night that they didn't catch me?
That was the night they did not catch you, I believe. Yes.
I landed on my head and passed out for about half a minute.
But you know what? He passed out for a half a minute and nothing missed a beat. Like you wouldn't have known. Right. Exactly. That's the best part.
Yeah.
But you guys have been running like that for years.
Yes,
and,
for a long time.
And so this has obviously been a different change for you. But you did something interesting. Now, back in 2006, in February of 2006, Voodoo Shop came out, which I think is a fantastic album.
Thank you.
It really summed up not even just about the feelings about Katrina that were in that album.
Yeah.
But there was just some great songs on that album. Then here you are again in March of this year, in the face of a pandemic. You release another EP. Like, tell me that process. How does it feel to do that? Because a lot of people aren't trying to put out right now because they can't really do a whole lot to put it out there.
Well, we didn't really know. I mean, this EP had been in the works for about 6 months before that. So it was a collection of songs that we had. There was no great meaning to it in terms of beforehand. Like on Voodoo Shop, we had written, I had written the song The Avenue the week after Katrina, and it was pretty obvious that it was something really special. And, we had like a song or two left to record for the album. We had no idea what we were doing because we recorded that album very piecemeal. It wasn't like we went to one studio at one time. We were just gathering up sessions. We record like 3 or 4 songs at a time, 2 songs at a time. And then we had like 10 songs. And then we recorded a song called Home that I'd co-written with our old guitar player, Paul Sanchez. And then The Avenue, which I wrote myself. And it just kind of, that whole album happened in a weird sort of way. When I was sequencing the album, the Voodoo Shop album, because, people used to listen to albums in sequence years ago. People had CDs. It was very important for me to put that song, Glad to Be Alive, in between the 2 songs that were written about Katrina, because, in spite of all the problems, in spite of all the worries, it was all about the celebration of being alive. Even the song like The Avenue that we played on the Ellen show, we ended up playing that on the Ellen DeGeneres TV show, the Mardi Gras of 2006. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those lucky things. It just kind of, everything fell in place. The Avenue was it just happened like that. And the EP, it was the same kind of thing. We were just putting together songs, and then all of a sudden we put it out. It was scheduled to come out at the end of March, and we didn't really see any reason to hold it back. And then people have really gravitated towards it, especially a lot of reviewers have written about a song called The Last Sad Song, saying this is the last sad song I'll ever write for you. And how it mirrors the feeling of what people are experiencing through the pandemic, of just kind of that, once again, that feeling of, what do we do now? It was the same exact feeling that New Orleanians had during Katrina, that, okay, what now? What do we do now? And it's just on a worldwide scale now. So, it is kind of weird the way history sort of repeated itself.
Just a little bit. I just thought about it because I remember at the time I was still working in radio when Voodoo Shop came out, and I had I thought it was a great album, and I thought it was so touching. I mean, it obviously moved me, not just as a Cowboy fan, but just as a lifelong New Orleanian. It really resonated. And people that we knew that heard it resonated. And I listened to Open Wide here, which is the name of the new EP, and it's fantastic. And I was having kind of the same feelings again, like you've got this music that's really kind of pumping you up, but it really still seems topical, even though you really started putting this together before this was even a thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been a certain, not to sound pretentious, but I guess, because as a writer, I tend to write about my life, whether it's obvious or kind of subconscious or something. I like to think there's always a bit of an emotional gravitas to what I write, but, obviously not in songs like Kelly Ripa or anything like that. But, but songs like The Avenue, it's so present, it's right there. It's kind of right in your face. But at the same time, I don't want to write songs that are just angry for the sake of being angry, or pity please pity poor me. I've had such a hard time. I hate that. I always, whenever I write a song about a certain difficulty, I always try to weave some sort of a story to it in terms of seeing the other side of the picture. It's the whole idea of, like the Avenue. My vision was that, I visualized kind of seeing New Orleans as a buddy, as a friend of mine. And we were sitting on a street corner, and my buddy, the city of New Orleans, had been in a really, really bad bar fight.
Yeah.
And I put my arm around him and just said, yeah, this is really bad. This is really bad, but it will get better. And it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just kind of, that was what I saw. And then the song came out of that.
It was a very moving song. And for someone like me who is born and raised and from New Orleans, that song, I think people that heard it that weren't even from here understood. Yeah. It touched them because they got a feel of what it's like. I mean, we talked about this on previous shows. No matter where you live, there's some sense of things that happen. I mean, they have volcanoes, they have tornadoes, they have hurricanes, earthquakes. Things happen all over the world. But I mean, for us,
just the natural human empathy for your fellow human beings who are suffering,
Right. But I mean, us, living here and with New Orleans being the type of city it is, I mean, it's a big city, but a small town.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It is a family. I mean, you wanted to joke about your mom and them, but everybody knows somebody. So, for me, especially growing up the way I did, my dad was in a jazz band. And so I've been around music my whole life. To me, whenever there's a memory in my life, I resonate songs with that. Like I can, if I hear a song on the radio, it brings me back to a specific memory in my life. And that song, The Avenue, will always be like, if I ever hear it or someone talk about it, it reminds me of that time. Cause you just you felt like, it gave you hope. Like, hey, we're going to get through this. We're going to be all right.
We'll get through this. And, and we'll get through all this stuff too. It's, we will get through it. It just takes time. And, it's, I wrote a song recently. I did it on one of my acoustic things that we do on Facebook, or that I've done on Facebook.
Which have been great, by the way, just FYI. We've been watching, we've been promoting some of those on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start doing them again. Obviously, it looks like they're going to kind of shut down at least a little bit again. So I'll be starting to do those again. I stopped doing them mostly because I needed to tend to family stuff.
Sure.
And, but I'm going to start doing those again. There's a song I wrote recently called "Try to See Your Troubles from the Other Side." It's kind of like the Avenue Part 3, because I believe to be the Avenue Part 2. This song,
I love that song. I was going to tell you, I believe is my favorite song of y'all.
Well, thank you.
Love
my
that
kids
song.
like that one too.
The video is just infectious and happy and upbeat, and it's just I love that song.
My kids, those are their two favorite songs, The Avenue and I Believe, and they'll actually sing it with me if they ever hear me play it, or something like that. They love it. And my little girl serenades me with The Avenue sometimes, and it's like, wow, that's the greatest version of the song I've ever heard in my entire life. But I mean, I got really lucky on those songs. Those are, you kind of sit back afterwards and go, wow, that's really good. That's better than I am. That's better than I am.
So y'all have some scheduled shows coming up next month. Are y'all? Are they still on hold?
We do. We're supposed to have one in Dallas on July the 4th, but the problem that we're running into is that you have a lot of promoters who are nervous about getting insurance for these types of things. Nobody really knows where the lines are. Nobody really knows where the boundaries are or anything like that. And then some of the venues, like I was talking to a friend of mine who is a promoter and runs a venue, and he said, look, I'd love to have you guys, but we can only have a certain percentage capacity. We can only have a certain.
So you're saying about touring, the promoters don't really know.
Yeah, the problem that we're running into is, I was talking to a friend of mine recently who's a promoter and runs a venue in South Carolina, and the thing about it is he operates right now at 25% capacity. And so therefore, they can't offer us what we need to cover our overhead, things like that. Not everybody lives in the same town. There's hotel rooms, there's instrument rental, all kinds of things that you got to keep in mind. It's not just showing up and saying, hey, let's rock. There is a certain business aspect to this that has to be appreciated and dealt with. It's like the old saying, it's show business, no show. And right now, it's definitely challenging. Like I said, this is the longest I've been off 30 years, and I miss it. And nobody really knows what's going to happen next, because it's kind of a brave new world, and not in a good way, you know. So as soon as it's possible for us to do that, we are going to come out guns blazing. But like we had an online concert scheduled, but that was right when, literally right the day when I had a family issue that was very imperative that I had to deal with. And I had to back out at the very last minute. And the guys went on without me, and they did a great job. But, you know, the band is the four of us, you know. I like to believe that I have a certain involvement. But, you know, so, no, you know, nobody really knows what the rules are or what the rules are going to be. And, you know, it's kind of like you don't want to go out and say, all right, well, we're going to do this anyway. And then it turns around to bite you or your fan base on the ass. So it's kind of like, okay, we're going to just kind of see what happens, you know, and that's basically what we've done literally since day one. I had no plan with this band. I literally thought it would last a month, and here I am 30 years later doing this, you know, so I can't really complain. In the meantime, I've done a lot of those Facebook things, which have been great, and thank you for the promotion and publicity, by the way. I do it mostly, just to try to keep the fan base engaged, just to keep people entertained, because I know it's easy when you're stuck at home to just go stir crazy. So I try to make it as fun as I can and entertaining as I can. And it's forced me to learn a lot of my old songs, which is nice, because I didn't realize I had such a big song catalog. Yeah.
You know, I watched one night when you had completely missed the words to one of them, and you were like,
oh, yeah.
All right, hold on, I got to start over. But what's great is to watch the fans that are watching, and they're all sending like, this song is the one I need to hear. This song is, but everybody's listening and really enjoying it together. And so you almost have, if you're watching the comments roll in, you almost have that camaraderie that those of us who have been to a lot of Cowboy Mouth shows know exists in the audience. That's what it is.
You know, I created the band with the specific idea of doing something different in terms of creating a community, in terms of creating something that, you know, I was really influenced by the old black gospel church services, because they used to play those on television when I was a boy, like 4 or 5 years old. And I was really growing up Catholic. You know, you grow up original sin, you're a terrible person, you're going to HELL, and, you know, and oh, by the way, give us your money and your kids, you know. It's like, you know, and in the meantime, there were these other services where people cleansed themselves. They celebrated, you know, whatever troubles they were having at the time, they were cleansing themselves, and they were just relieving themselves of their burdens. And I thought, this is the way to go right here. I want to do that. I don't want to do what you guys do. I want to do that. I don't want to feel bad all the time. Life is hard enough, you know. Even at the age of 5 years old, I was like, life is hard enough. I want to enjoy this experience, you know. So I kind of leaned towards that, and I wanted to create something that was more of a celebration, and not like the typical cliche of, hey, let's rock and roll, hey, let's get drunk, hey, let's, you know, screw a bunch of whatever, you know, all the cheesy aspects that were just overdone by the time I formed Cowboy Mouth. I really wanted to do something different. So in between songs, because I'd never been a frontman before, I'd never done it. It wasn't like I came fully formed. It was just like, okay, I knew I didn't want to spend my life looking at a guitar player's rear end, so I moved the drums up front. But it's not like I wanted to put anybody in the back. I just wanted to be up where the fun was, you know. And so there I was, and I was reading a lot of like Norman Vincent Peale at the time, you know, kind of inspirational literature. So I would take little bits from that, and I'd say that in between songs, instead of just like, hey, I wrote this song when I was, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, nobody cares, you know. Right. And I noticed that when I would say things like, are you having a great time? Believe in yourself, and anything's possible. And it made people, the reaction was really visceral. I mean, they just came back as like, really, people seized on that. It was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And it gave me the confidence and the comfort to really expand that side of my personality, just to kind of turn into, I guess, the personality on stage that I turned into. So
yeah, and I tell you I've talked about it on the show before, that a Cowboy Mouth show it's a revival. It is it is something that is designed to make you forget about anything that's troubling you and pull you into a different spot. And I have a couple of those times. I mean, you are the classic at starting a show by just making everyone as uncomfortable as possible, by saying you need to get up, you need to get out of your comfort zone. Yeah. And then nothing goes backwards from that point. It is just all high energy. And you know, you go into, even when you've got interludes where you do Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is that is a phenomenal thing that you've done. I've seen you do it many times. And
I do like that. I do Amazing Grace. I do
Amazing Grace. Yeah. And I tell you, I watched you perform the John Butte song, For the Canal Street.
Yeah. Actually, Paul wrote that.
Paul wrote that,
Paul
right?
and John wrote that when he was still in the bands, and we put that on a live album.
Yeah, and I saw you perform. It actually
came out before Butte's version, huh?
I saw you perform that, and it put me in a whole different place. So I'm telling anybody listening, if you see Cowboy Mouth performing within 100 miles of you, make it a point to go. Make it a point to go. You're
very kind, Jeff. Thank you.
No.
I want to keep this job.
Let me tell you what's a cool thing. You know, I've been to a lot of concerts throughout my life, and you're inside of a venue, and obviously the sound travels. I saw y'all at Champion Square a couple of years back. I think it was a Saints playoffs game, and the fans. I mean, that you see the mob, hundreds and hundreds of Saints fans, all through the Champion Square, and then up on the stage, and y'all are playing, and everybody's singing, and it's just so loud, and we're outside. We're outside, and it's just, the sound is just everywhere. And it's like, to me, that's just, it's incredible, because you just get the crowd. I mean, we're already hyped up anyway, to be at a Saints game, but to have y'all perform, and then got hundreds of fans sitting there, and they're singing along, and it's just, like I said, it's an outdoor venue. I mean, there's nothing.
The thing that I've always concentrated on as a performer, and it's very easy not to understand this from an audience perspective, the show, Cowboy Mouth Show, it's not about me. It's not about Fred. It's not about that. I'm there to provide a service. And my service is to remind people through my performance, through the songs, through playing with what I think is one of the best rock and roll bands in the world, and providing that energy and that joy and that celebration, and reminding people of that inside of themselves. So I don't really, when I do something silly or something like that, it's never like, hey, look at me, I'm so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you get some people who criticize you because they don't understand that. It's kind of like, oh, look at him, he thinks he's so this and so that. It's like, no, I really don't. But I mean, it's, you can't please everybody. So you just got to do what rings true to your own heart. And the thing about a Cowboy Mouth show is it's about everybody. I mean, everybody there leaving feeling better than they have in a long time, and hopefully taking that feeling and running with it in their own lives, however they want to. It's like a Cowboy Mouth show can be enjoyed as a beer drinking, hell raising good time, or it can be enjoyed on a number of levels, and that's fine. You just put it out there, and you give your audience the opportunity to run with it, and hopefully they'll run with it, all the way to the goal line. So,
Well, that takes me to my next question. Y'all have played over 30 years, all over the country, different venues, different cities.
Played every gig known to man. I've played in front of 150,000 people, and I've played in front of one person. And the one thing those gigs have in common is that we kick ass, both gigs.
So outside of New Orleans, obviously, because we know you love it here, what's been your favorite city and favorite venue and memory attached to that?
So many. San Diego at the Belly Up. I love that place. Let's see. Denver at the Bluebird. One of my favorite places in the entire world is Charleston, South Carolina. There's a little island right on the ocean called Isle of Palms, IOP, a venue there called the Windjammer. It's just one of the great rock and roll bars of all time. We were turned on to it by the Hootie guys back in the 90s. And it's just a great place. In fact, we're supposed to play there at the end of July, but once again, I have no idea what's going to happen. New York, we used to play this place called BB King's that was right on Times Square. I loved it. But we also used to play Irving Plaza. That was great. D.C., Virginia, the Tally Ho, St. Louis, the Old Rock House, Chicago, the House of Blues. I mean, it's not a matter of the venue we play. I mean, any place we play, it turns into a Cowboy Mouth show. And that's what it's all about. It's, some of the venues are nicer than others, but, you can play like someplace like the Windjammer, which is not technically, a really swank venue, but, bands love it and the audiences love it. There's not a bad sight line. Everybody has a great time. So it just makes my job a lot easier. So those are some of them. I miss the days of Brendan Inn. Tipitina's is always fun, sweaty, nasty. But, in New Orleans, we tend to just do festivals. We don't really do that many club shows anymore simply because, there's a lot more festival opportunities for a band like us, so. And that makes a lot of sense because you can play to more people and you can really remind folks of why they fell in love with you in the first place. Like, what was that thing we did last year? It was right on Bayou St. John. I forget, the Bayou Boogaloo. We had never done that before. And there had to have been about 10, 15,000 people going berserk. And it was just a ball. And we were supposed to do the Red Dress Run in August, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But we did that 10 years ago, and it was one of the most fun shows we ever played, in the entire history of the band. Just seeing 5,000 people, male and female, in red dresses going berserk.
That's getting to be a huge event. A bunch of my friends participate in it every year. It's getting to be huge, and it's hard to explain to people that are not from here.
No,
but it's
okay. What you do is you wear a dress and you get drunk and you run around the city in broad daylight in August, and it's fun.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense to us. Maybe not in Minnesota, but it makes perfect sense to us. I get it.
In New Orleans, we've always had this acceptance of the absurd, simply because life and death kind of coexist very equally. With the whole, you grow up seeing, graveyards built above ground, and there's always that consciousness of the city being overtaken by the water at any moment. And, I think that's probably why people just tend to celebrate more in New Orleans than anywhere else, simply because, not just because it's accepted, not because it's part of the culture, but it's almost out of spite. It's like, yeah, I'm going to live this moment. I'm going to live the hell out of it. And that's kind of what, a Cowboy Mouth show is. It's not about, please like our band, please love us, please make us rock stars. It's about, here we are against the odds. And you know what? When you leave here tonight, I don't want you saying, oh, I had a pleasant time. Well, they played all my favorite songs from college. No, I don't care whether you're 20. I don't care whether you're 90. I want it to be the best damn rock and roll show anybody's ever seen, heard, or felt in their lives. And that's what I go for. And I shoot for the moon. Every once in a while, I hit the stars.
That's perfect. And those are the nights that you really know that it's on. And you've talked about some of the great places you've been and some of your favorite places to play. But in terms of individual shows, are there one or two individual shows throughout the Cowboy Mouth time that really stick out to you? What are those shows that really stick out?
Let's see. There were two shows post-Katrina that really stick out. Immediately post-Katrina. One was the Voodoo Fest that they put on in September in New Orleans, and New Orleans was still kind of on lockdown, so a lot of the people we played for were first responders and things like that. So we ended up, it was the first time we'd ever played the Avenue, and you literally saw 10,000 people just cry. And it was like, okay, they seem to like this one. And then we were the first band to headline the House of Blues after Katrina. And you can find it on YouTube. There's a version of us playing the Avenue for the first time. And the audience, sold out. It was great. And the audience was, it was locals, local Cowboy Mouth fans, yada, yada. Not the people we had played to for Voodoo Fest, because everybody was scattered. And so it was like the locals, the Cowboy Mouth fans, and we started off uncharacteristically with the Avenue. And you can hear, it's on YouTube. There's a recording of it, a bootleg version of it on YouTube, just that song, the first time we played it. And you could hear people listening to every line and just taking it in, and just because the song hadn't come out yet, because the album wasn't released until, I think, January of 2006. And this was November of 2005. And so that always stuck. And I remember playing the song and being very conscious of trying to remember every word. And feeling the hair on my arms just stand up. It's pretty wild to listen to. Check it out on YouTube. It's like the Avenue House of Blues, 2005 November. And let's see, we played in New York City. We had a gig booked at Irving Plaza, and it was early October, but it was early October 2001. It was literally like weeks after 9/11. And they turned it into like a fireman's benefit, like a first responders benefit. And, I didn't think, because not to be rude, but I try not to think when I perform, because thinking kind of gets in the way. You just got to kind of be. You just got to kind of be, Yeah. And so we ended up, and I was really pushing the audience, not being cognizant of the fact that these guys had been through something really traumatic, but it turned out great because the audience just exploded. They needed that kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Catharsis that a Cowboy Mouth show brings. And it was nuts. I mean, I'd never been hugged and kissed by so many giant burly Irish firemen in my entire life. And it was really, really magical. It was one of those nights where you felt the stage just shake because the audience was so nuts. And those are great, when you realize you're just a catalyst for something bigger. You're the link in the chain that's getting these folks to the point where they need to go to hopefully heal.
That's awesome. Yeah,
those are two big ones.
I gotta ask, I got a buddy of mine in Florida who was asked, we were talking about you the other day, and he asked about the fact that technology's changed a lot since the band formed. I mean, it's been 30 years.
Yeah.
The way you make albums, the way you release albums, to reach the fans, everything else. Is there anything that you liked better about the early days of Cowboy Mouth in terms of technology versus now, or is it just all better now?
No, everything's better now simply because it gives you direct access. I mean, back then, when we were having major labels, when we were on major labels like MCA and Atlantic and all that stuff, you always had to go through, 5 or 6 people with egos, to try to get a creative decision, It wasn't like, hey, here are these songs, because we were never in that position of saying, okay, here's an album full of songs. This is what we want to do. I mean, we were always kind of in a somewhat compromised position in terms of major labels, simply because, honestly, I'll say I didn't really know the business, and I wasn't as shrewd as I think, as I wish I would have been. But at the same time, that's not who I am. I'm not one of those cutthroat business guys who's just going to say, hey, this is the way it is, and if you don't like it, blah, blah, it's like, I was very aware of being given an opportunity and trying to do the best with it. But at the same time, the music business used to be, and probably still is to a certain extent, full of so many people who were just clamoring for their giant piece of a very small pie. And, I really don't miss those days. I don't miss the pressure. I don't miss hoping that 20 things go exactly right so you can get an opportunity. I'm having more fun now with it than I did back then. Back then, there was a lot of pressure. It was very stressful. And, I couldn't, mistakes that were made. Of course, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Everybody does. But at the same time, it was frustrating when, mistakes would be made that had nothing to do with you, but you had to suffer for them. It's just kind of like
it's more authentic now because you get to pave your own path instead of someone doing it for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the mistakes are yours, the choices are yours, everything's yours, and but at the same time, there's you don't have the luxury of having people with a certain attention span anymore. I used to think it was short back when Cowboy Mouth formed, but at the same time now it's like, the old adage of please don't bore us, get to the chorus. And, there's always been that whole thing in the entertainment industry of trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to keep up with the cool kids, and that's never really been my thing. I've always preferred to go my own way. And thankfully the musicians I've had with me over the years, have been generous enough to allow for that kind of perspective and path forging.
Doing it well and successfully. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, we've had a lot of great players in the band, and we've been very fortunate. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's been in the band, whether or not we got along when they split or not. But it's one of those things where you just do the best you can, because the reward isn't some sort of economic payday, which has never happened. The reward isn't other, having your ego gratified. The reward is at the end of a show, knowing that you did the very best you possibly could.
No,
that you have nothing less to give.
You've played at different venues all over the country, different cities. You've had members throughout the years come and go. Mm-hmm. Is there anyone that you have not collaborated yet that you would like to? Like who's on your I guess dream list of somebody you'd like to collaborate with in the future?
I have no idea. I don't think about it in terms like that. I mean, songwriting and collaboration is not a conscious process for me. It's not like I sit down and say, okay, I will write a song. This is what I'm going to do. That's not what I do at all. I mean, literally, they just come to me. Either they come fully formed, or they come as ideas or emotions, and I just kind of roll with it. Sometimes I'll get a friend to help me out. Sometimes I'll get John to help me out, or something like that. But it's not a conscious process. I'm not shrewd enough to be able to really to play that game, which I think personally works for me better. I'd love to play with anybody. There's a lot of great music in New Orleans. Always has been.
Yes.
It's like Shorty was a fan, and we played a couple of shows together. His band are great. I'd love to play with them again. Love the Revivalists, but who doesn't? There's a lot of great stuff in New Orleans.
We're very blessed to have.
We're very blessed. We're very blessed, and we always have been.
Yes.
And there's a lot of great bands that people forgot about, for whatever reasons, that had their moment, like a band like the Normals from the late 70s, who were stunning. A band like the Cold from the early 80s, who were great. A band I was in early on called Dash Rip Rock before I formed Cowboy Mouth, which I think was, just as vital as Cowboy Mouth. And, we made a lot of noise, and then it was I actually used that as a springboard to form Cowboy Mouth. So it's all part of the journey. It's all part of what you do with your heart and your soul, and swinging for the fences as much as you can. So.
Yeah, and I've always said this, and I say it because of growing up the way I did. Music is very personal. It really
is. It's a very personal experience, especially when you grow up with it in New Orleans. Like I always say, people in New Orleans dance differently because we, from the womb, we're around Mardi Gras parades, and you have that bass drum just, We move differently, we think differently, we feel differently, we act differently, we dance differently, and it's part of who we are, where we come from, and where we're going to.
Fred, last week we did an Ask Jeff and Tina segment where we had listeners from around the country ask us different questions. Mm-hmm. And one of the ones I wanted to pose to you is, what is your favorite New Orleans meal? If you had to put a place or a dish or something, what is that?
You know what the problem with that question is? It's like, if you name something, then there's 20 places that you don't name that, number one, you forget about. They're great. But number two, you piss them off because they're friends of you. For me, honestly, and I know this might sound kind of quaint for whatever reasons, but, I love RNOs in Bucktown. Getting a giant meatball po' boy dressed. And, it's actually when when I got married, because me and my wife got married on the Steamboat Natchez, and my kids were there, and we had just a giant family dinner at R&O's that night. And then my little boy comes up, he just looks at me and says, "Daddy," I said, "What?" "I never want to go home." I was like, okay, worked for me. And, it's just such a great place, the food, the people, and, I've become really close to the people who, work there and own it, like Carla and UJ and everybody there. They treat me and my family great, and the food is just perfect.
It is.
Just
those onion rings are out of this world. I hear you, because I've been there many a times. It's
the roast beef po' boys.
Now I'm
but then again, there's like 20 or 30 other places you can name at the drop of a hat, and it's like, okay. So, but yeah, if I had to pick one, that would be that's my go-to right there.
That's awesome.
It's good stuff. Good stuff. I'd agree with you. It's good stuff.
Nah.
And I got to ask you, you not only have you done the music and everything else, but you wrote a children's book.
Yeah.
Fred, the New Orleans drummer boy.
Yeah.
I mean, tell us about that real quick before we get out of here. Tell us what was happening with that.
It's called Fred the New Orleans Drummer Boy. It's available either on the Cowboy Mouth merchandise or River Road Press. It was just an idea that kind of came to my aunt. My aunt is one of these southern, matriarchs of the family who doesn't pronounce her R's, and she's just a great character. And every once in a while she gets these feelings, it's like, and it's unusual because a lot of them come true, I have a feeling, it's like, okay. One day just over dinner she had a fit. Fred, I had a feeling the other day. You need to write a children's book. You need to call it Fred the New Orleans Drummer Boy. He's like, okay. So I figured, well, let me look into it. So I did, and I had sold a house to this woman who owned a bookstore in Uptown, and I called her up and said, hey, I was thinking about writing a children's book. And she said, oh, I've got the guy. She turned me on to my editor, Scott Campbell, and one thing led to another, and it just really just snowballed, and the whole thing came out, and it did really well, and I got to make my kids' characters in it, and it's been a blast, and it's still selling to this day. So there you go. It's like a Cowboy Mouth show. It's like a Cowboy Mouth show in children's book form. So it's actually pretty cool.
And where can our listeners pick that up at?
Like I said, you can pick it up either direct River Road Press, or you can get it at the Cowboy Mouth merchandise store online, or any fine bookstore in New Orleans. All the independent bookstores carry it, and even like the Barnes and Nobles and things like that. So you can find it anywhere.
Awesome. Well, look, before we wrap, I just want to tell you, Fred, thank you so much for coming on with us this evening.
Well, thank you guys.
Really,
Let's do it
really
again
enjoyed
sometime.
it. Yes, definitely. And for all our listeners out there, this is Fred LeBlanc with Cowboy Mouth.
Are you with me?
Yes. And this is Tina at the NOLA Girl. Our Twitter handle is at Fleurs_Truly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here with Jeff, my co-host. And Jeff, you can give everybody your Twitter handle too.
That's right. The NOLA Rolla, baby. The NOLA Rolla on Twitter.
NOLA Rolla, I like that.
I think everybody we had a little contest a couple weeks back to get Jeff a new Twitter handle, and everybody's learning it now, and they really like it. And I'm at the NOLA Girl, so you can't forget that. So, but again, Fred, thank you so much for joining us. I want to tell all our listeners, have a great week. Have a very happy but safe 4th of July. And thank you again for joining us on this week's episode of Fleurs Truly.
God bless America.
Good night, y'all.